The weirdest thing about being told you're dying is how quickly everyone else starts planning what your absence will buy them. 6 months ago, doctors looked me in the eye and said the words pancreatic cancer. I'm Tessa, 47, and I remember the exact sound my boyfriend's breath made beside me, like the air got punched out of his chest. Liam grabbed my hand so hard my fingers went numb, and I let that pain anchor me because my mind was already trying to float away. For weeks, life became a tunnel. Hospital lights, paperwork, aggressive treatment, and a calendar filled with appointments that sounded like punishment. Liam took time off work without complaining once. He drove. He waited. He sat in plastic chairs and talked to me like I wasn't already halfway gone. He still laughed at my stupid jokes even when I was bald and bloated and scared. My mom, Carol, and my sister Janet came around a lot at first. They brought food I couldn't eat, stood in my kitchen like guests afraid to touch anything, and asked me the same questions over and over: how I felt, whether I'd slept, whether I was keeping up with my meds. Then, 3 months in, the doctor called. They were wrong. It wasn't cancer. It was a rare pancreatic condition that looked like it on the scans, but it was treatable. Full recovery expected. Liam cried in the kitchen and held me so tight I could barely breathe. That night, we talked about the future like we were allowed to want things again. Trips, renovations, normal boring mornings. The next day, I called my mom and sister with the news. They said the right words. That's wonderful. We're so relieved. But their voices were off, like someone had pulled a rug out from under a plan they didn't realize I knew they had. And then, at Sunday dinner, my nephew Bobby, 12 years old, phone in hand, mouth moving faster than his brain, looked straight at me and said, casually, like it was already decided. He thought he was going to be rich soon because I was sick. The table went silent. My mom stared at her plate. My sister didn't correct him, and Liam's fork slipped from his hand with a sharp little clatter that felt louder than a scream. That was the moment I realized the scariest part of my diagnosis wasn't the disease. It was what it revealed. If you'd asked me a year ago what my family was like, I would have said the safe answer. Normal, I would have smiled. A little messy, but who isn't? The truth is, my family has always been the kind that keeps affection tucked behind practicality. We don't hug for long. We don't say the heavy things out loud. We show love by showing up with groceries, by fixing a leaky faucet, by asking if you've eaten, not by looking you in the eye and saying I'm proud of you. My mom, Carol, is 73 and built like a rule book in a cardigan. Neat hair, neat house, neat opinions. She's the type who thinks emotions are best handled quietly, behind a closed door where no one can accuse you of being dramatic. My sister Janet is 35, younger than me by 12 years, which means I spent a big chunk of my life half sister, half second parent. When our dad died, I stepped in without being asked. I helped with school forms, car repairs, college applications, whatever needed doing. Not because I wanted a medal, because I loved them, because I believed family worked like that. And over the last 20 years, I built a small business from the ground up. Nothing flashy, no private jets, no mansions, but successful enough that I stopped checking my bank account before buying groceries. Successful enough that when Janet needed help, I could step in. I paid for her college after Dad died. When she divorced 5 years ago, I covered the down payment on her house because she was panicking, and the boys, Michael, 14, and Bobby, 12, needed stability more than she needed pride. I bought birthday gifts that were bigger than necessary. I chipped in for sports fees, school trips, little emergencies. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was love. And maybe it was. But love can get mistaken for a guarantee when you do it long enough. Liam came into my life before any of that got complicated. He's 38, steady in a way that makes you feel your nervous system unclench. We've been together 13 years. We've lived in the same house for 10. We never rushed marriage, partly because neither of us cared about the performance of it, and partly because my life was always busy. Business, family, obligations. The never-ending sense that if I wasn't the one holding the roof up, it would collapse. Liam didn't fight me on it. He didn't demand a ring to prove anything. He just stayed. He became the person who knew where I kept the extra batteries, the person who remembered my coffee order, the person who could tell by the way I set my keys down whether I'd had a good day or a brutal one. But my mother never fully accepted him as my real family. Even after a decade, she introduced him as Tessa's boyfriend, like he was a phase I'd eventually grow out of. She'd forget his Christmas gifts some years, always with a quick, defensive laugh like it was just an innocent oversight. In family photos, she'd stand in a way that edged him to the side. It wasn't loud, it wasn't overt. It was the kind of exclusion that stays deniable, which somehow makes it worse. Liam never complained. He'd squeeze my hand under the table and let it go, like he was telling me, "I'm here. Don't make this your war if you don't want to." Then the diagnosis hit, and suddenly my world shrank to medical terms and survival math. I lost weight fast, my clothes hanging off me like they belonged to someone else. My stomach hurt in a way that made me afraid to eat. I slept and still woke up exhausted, like my body was working overtime just to keep the lights on. When the doctors confirmed pancreatic cancer, the air in the room changed. Even the nurses spoke softer, like sound itself could bruise me. Liam took time off work immediately. He drove me to appointments. He tracked my meds. He held my hair back when the nausea got violent, and I didn't recognize the person in the mirror. Mom and Janet visited a lot at first. They sat in my living room with polite faces and cautious silence, like they were rehearsing grief. Janet sometimes brought the boys. Michael would hover near the doorway, uncertain. Bobby mostly stared at his phone, bored, annoyed to be anywhere without Wi-Fi. I didn't blame them. I didn't think I had the right. Because when you're told you might not have long, you start lowering your expectations of people just to keep the peace. What I didn't realize was that lowering expectations doesn't stop disappointment. It just makes it quieter. The first warning signs didn't come as cruelty. They came as pauses. After the doctor called to say the diagnosis was wrong, after the word recovery re-entered my vocabulary, I expected relief to roll through my family like a wave. Instead, it arrived in pieces, awkward pieces, forced ones. When I told my mom the news over the phone, she said, "That's wonderful," quickly, like she was reading from a script she hadn't rehearsed enough. Then there was a beat of silence. Not the good kind. The kind where your ear presses closer to the phone because something's missing. "That's really good," she added quieter. Janet reacted the same way. Happy words, flat tone. I hung up both calls feeling oddly guilty, like I'd disrupted something by not dying on schedule. Liam noticed it before I said anything. That night, while I was brushing my teeth, he leaned in the doorway and watched me in the mirror. "They sounded strange," he said carefully. "They're probably just adjusting," I replied, automatically defending them. It's a lot to process. That explanation became my reflex. When my energy started coming back, I talked about future plans the way people do when they're testing reality. Renovating the kitchen, taking a long trip next summer, maybe cutting back my hours at work once things stabilized. Every time my mom's face would tighten, just slightly, like she'd bitten into something sour. "Oh," she'd say, "you're feeling well enough to think about that already?" Janet stopped bringing the boys around as much. When she did, she'd make comments that landed wrong if you paid attention. "Must be nice to bounce back so fast," she said once, watching me carry groceries inside. "Some people don't get that lucky." I laughed it off, because I didn't want to be the person who accused her of being disappointed that I was alive. Sunday dinners resumed like nothing had changed. Same table, same seating, same unspoken rules. That night, Bobby was in a mood, shoulders slumped, eyes glued to his phone, barely touching his food. When my mom told him to put it away, he snapped back, irritated, then turned his attention to me. And that's when he said it. Casual, offhand, like a kid repeating a fact he'd overheard and accepted as true. He said he thought he was going to be rich soon because I was sick. For a moment, I genuinely thought I'd misheard him. The room froze. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. Liam's hand stilled on my knee under the table. I looked from Bobby to Janet, waiting for her to laugh, to scold him, to say, "What the hell are you talking about?" She didn't. She stared down at her plate. My mom did the same. The silence stretched, heavy and deliberate. It felt like being pushed underwater and realizing no one was reaching for you. I forced a laugh because that's what you do when reality feels too sharp. "Why would you think that?" I asked Bobby gently. "I'm not going anywhere." He shrugged, confused now, sensing he'd crossed a line he didn't know existed. "Well, Mom said—" Janet's head snapped up. "Bobby," she warned, too late. I felt something inside me crack. Not break, crack. A thin line running straight through the center of my chest. I said calmly, "Liam and I have been together 13 years. If anything happened to me, he'd be taken care of." Janet's reaction was immediate. Her eyes flicked to Liam, then back to me. "Oh," she said, "I didn't realize." The rest of the dinner limped along on politeness and forced conversation. My mom tried to steer us toward neutral topics: weather, television, the boys' school, but no one was really present anymore. Under the table, Liam's thumb traced slow circles against my knuckles, grounding me. We left early. In the car, neither of us spoke for a long time. When Liam finally said, "That wasn't okay," his voice was steady, but I could hear the anger under it. And for the first time, instead of defending my family, I said nothing. Because deep down, I already knew. That comment didn't come out of nowhere. It came from somewhere comfortable. The call from my mother came the next morning. I was in the kitchen, sunlight spilling across the counter, the smell of coffee filling the house in a way that felt almost indecent after everything that had happened. Liam was still asleep upstairs, one arm flung over my pillow like he was holding on to proof that I was real. My phone buzzed. "Hi, Mom," I said, already bracing myself. She launched straight into concern, her voice syrupy with it. "How are you feeling today? Did you sleep? Are you keeping up with your medications? When is your next checkup?" She asked questions she already knew the answers to, questions she'd asked the day before, and the day before that. I answered anyway. Then, like she'd been waiting for a green light, her tone shifted. "So," she said carefully, "have you thought about what would happen to the business if something happened to you?" I stared at the steam curling out of my mug. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Well," she continued, "it's just practical to be prepared. You know how these things can go. Have you and Liam discussed financial planning?" The way she said his name, hesitant, qualified, set my teeth on edge. "I have a lawyer," I replied. "Everything's handled." A pause. "And your will?" she pressed. "Is it up to date?" Something cold slid down my spine. "Why are you asking me this?" I said. She laughed softly as if I were being dramatic. "I'm just being a mother. We need to think about these things. Janet has the boys to worry about. You know how expensive college is." There it was. Not relief that I was going to live. Not gratitude. Logistics. I ended the call politely, because that's the muscle memory you build when you grow up smoothing over other people's discomfort. But I didn't shake it off. That afternoon, I sat in my lawyer's office for the second time in 3 months. The first visit had been during the worst of the diagnosis, when fear had made me practical. I'd split my estate carefully. Half to Liam, the rest divided among family members, including trust funds for both nephews. At the time, it felt fair. Now it felt naive. I stared at the legal documents spread across the desk and heard Bobby's voice in my head. I thought I was going to be rich soon. I told my lawyer to make changes. I removed my nephews as direct beneficiaries. Their portion was redirected to a pancreatic research organization, the same kind that had caught my misdiagnosis before it cost me my life. The education accounts I'd set up for the boys when they were born stayed untouched. College was covered. Extras were not. My lawyer didn't question me. He just nodded and made notes. Driving home, I felt both lighter and sick to my stomach. That night, around 3 a.m, I woke to the sound of Liam breathing beside me. Slow, steady. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything I'd almost lost. Without planning to, without rehearsing it, I rolled toward him and whispered, "Will you marry me?" He blinked awake, confusion giving way to a soft, disbelieving smile. "Are you serious?" he asked. "Yes," I said. My voice didn't shake. "I don't want to wait anymore." He didn't hesitate. "Of course," he said. "Yes." He pulled me against him, and for the first time since the diagnosis, something settled inside me. In the morning, he grinned like it had been a dream. "Did that really happen?" he asked, pouring coffee. "It did," I smiled. "About time, right?" We decided to share the news quietly. Liam posted the engagement announcement online later that afternoon. 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Is this some kind of joke?" she demanded. "No," I said calmly. "We're getting married." "Why now?" she asked. "After all these years?" The implication hung between us, ugly and undeniable. I felt something in me snap. I told her everything. How she and Janet had treated me like a financial safety net for years. How Bobby's comment hadn't come from nowhere. How no one seemed as relieved as they should have been that I wasn't dying. She cried. She denied it. She told me Liam, I corrected her, could move on someday. That he was younger. That he had his own career. That he didn't need my support. I told her Liam had been my family long before a ring made it official. She hung up without congratulating us. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't about fear. It was about entitlement. After that phone call, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time without moving. The coffee had gone cold. The sunlight had shifted. The house felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath along with me. Liam came in and immediately knew something was wrong. He didn't ask what happened, not right away. He just pulled out the chair across from me and waited, giving me space to decide how much of myself I could hand over without breaking. "She thinks this is about money," I said finally. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. About inheritance, about control. His jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. I told him everything. The phone call, the questions, the implication that he was temporary, that my life, our life, was a contingency plan for other people's security. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. I don't care about their money, he said quietly. I care about you. I nodded. I knew that. I'd always known that. But knowing something doesn't stop it from hurting when someone else refuses to see it. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed the last decade of family dinners, favors, checks written without hesitation. I wondered how many of those moments had been quietly refiled in my sister's mind, not as generosity, but as precedent. I kept asking myself the same question in different disguises. Did I miss this, or did I choose not to see it? Over the next few days, messages trickled in. Friends congratulated us on the engagement. Coworkers sent flowers. Even my doctor emailed to say how happy he was about the news. My family stayed quiet, until Janet called. Her tone was softer than Mom's had been. Apologetic, strategic. She said Bobby's comment had been a misunderstanding, that he'd overheard adults talking about life insurance and jumped to conclusions. She asked if we could meet for coffee and clear the air. I agreed, partly because I wanted peace, and partly because I needed to hear her say it to my face. We met near my office. She brought up the engagement immediately. So, this isn't because of what happened at dinner? She asked. No, I said. Dad, this is because I almost died. She looked relieved, too relieved. She talked about the boys, about how much they missed me, about how confusing everything had been. When we stood to leave, she asked, casually, if I was still planning to help with Michael's college the way we'd discussed years ago. I reminded her that the education accounts were already set up, that they always had been. Her shoulders relaxed. The conversation ended on polite terms. But I walked away feeling manipulated, like the concern had been conditional. That night, Liam and I talked about boundaries, real ones, the kind that don't come with apologies attached. We decided to keep wedding plans small, quiet, ours. A few weeks later, my office threw me a welcome back party when I returned full-time. Someone brought a cake that read, "Glad you're not dead, boss." I laughed harder than I had in months. Life moved forward. And then my mother showed up unannounced. She brought an old photo of the three of us from years ago and asked if we could make peace. She said fear had taken over when I got sick, that she'd been trying to prepare herself, not profit. I listened. I didn't argue. I didn't forgive either. When she asked if we could resume Sunday dinners, I told her I needed more time. Later, I called Janet to hear her side directly. That conversation went badly. She got defensive. She minimized everything. She only acknowledged Liam's importance once I referred to him as my husband-to-be. That was the moment it clicked. To them, relationships only counted when paperwork made them real. The years before that, disposable. After that call, I cried for the first time since the diagnosis, not because I was scared of dying, but because I finally understood the cost of being the reliable one. You don't just give help. You teach people what to expect from you. And unlearning that hurts, but it's necessary. The strangest part wasn't the confrontation. It was the quiet that followed. For a while, everything felt suspended, like the moment right after an earthquake when you're standing still, waiting to see what else is going to collapse. Liam and I moved forward with our plans anyway. We chose a small courthouse ceremony. 6 friends, no family drama, no performances. Just a legal promise to match the life we'd already been living for 13 years. We didn't announce the date. We didn't ask for opinions. And that alone seemed to escalate everything. My mother's messages started coming more frequently, but they were strangely hollow. Updates about her garden, a new show she was watching, questions that skirted around anything real, like she was testing whether I'd invite her back into the center of my life without her having to apologize. Janet, on the other hand, went quiet. Completely. Until the letter arrived. It came in a stiff white envelope with a law firm's letterhead. I remember standing in the hallway, mail in hand, heart pounding like I was about to open test results again. The letter was polite, professional, carefully worded. Janet was requesting information about the education accounts I'd set up for the boys. It suggested, without outright accusing, that I might have changed the terms or mismanaged the funds without informing her. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. Then I felt sick, because this wasn't confusion. This was escalation. I forwarded the letter to my lawyer, who responded within an hour. He confirmed what I already knew. Janet had no legal right to that information. The accounts were intact. The beneficiaries were protected. Any further inquiries would need to go through proper legal channels. He sent the response on my behalf. After that, the silence returned. And this time, it felt deliberate. Liam and I got married on a clear Tuesday morning. I wore a simple dress. He wore the suit he already owned. We signed papers, took photos on the courthouse steps, and went out for lunch afterward like we'd just done something beautifully ordinary. I sent my mother and sister a photo that afternoon. My mom replied with a single word: "Congratulations." Janet didn't respond at all. A month later, my mother showed up again, this time with a story rehearsed enough that she believed it herself. She said she'd been afraid after my father died, that when I got sick, she spiraled into planning mode, that discussions about money were about protecting the family, not hoping I'd disappear. I asked her directly about Bobby's comment. She admitted there had been conversations. She insisted they were practical, not wishful. She said Janet was struggling financially. I didn't contradict her, even though I knew it wasn't true, even though Janet's lifestyle told a different story. When she brought up Liam again, this time framing her past behavior as concern that he wouldn't be protected without marriage, I finally understood something. She wasn't lying to me. She was lying to herself. And there was no version of that conversation where I walked away feeling lighter. When she left, I called Janet. I wanted clarity. What I got was deflection. She accused me of twisting things, of overreacting, of punishing her children for a stupid comment. When I pointed out that she only acknowledged Liam as my family after we were married, she snapped back. "That's different. He's your husband now." That sentence settled something inside me with finality. Love didn't count to her until it came with paperwork. 13 years of partnership meant nothing. A marriage certificate meant everything. A week later, the boys texted me on my birthday. The messages were polite, short, probably prompted. I replied warmly anyway, because they were kids, and I refused to make them collateral damage. Liam and I decided then what our long-term approach would be. We wouldn't cut my family off completely, but we would stop feeding the dynamic. No more private dinners. No more financial discussions. No more rescuing. We put everything in writing with our lawyer. Clear boundaries, clear documentation, no ambiguity. And then finally we left. Mexico. 2 weeks in a quiet beachfront villa. No calls, no explanations. We swam, we slept. We sat in silence and watched sunsets without anyone needing anything from me. One night, sitting on the sand, Liam turned to me and said softly, "This is the happiest I've seen you in years." I realized he was right. Without the constant pressure to be useful, to be the solution, I felt lighter, healthier, whole. By the time we came home, I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. And clarity is dangerous to people who benefited from your confusion. The crash didn't come with shouting. It came in the quiet hours, those long, stretched-out nights where your body is exhausted, but your mind refuses to stop pacing. I would wake up around 3 a.m, heart racing, staring at the ceiling while Liam slept beside me. His breathing was slow and even, one arm heavy across my waist, grounding me in the present. And still, my chest felt hollow, like something essential had been scooped out and left unreplaced. Because clarity doesn't mean peace. Not right away. During the day, I functioned. I went to work. I smiled at coworkers. I answered emails. I laughed at the right moments. I played the part of a woman who had survived something huge and come out stronger. At night, I replayed everything. Every check I'd written without being asked. Every time I'd stepped in before Janet even had to explain. Every dinner, where Liam sat quietly beside me while my mother talked over him like he was furniture. I wondered how many times I'd mistaken being needed for being loved. The hardest part wasn't losing my family's approval. It was realizing how much of my identity I'd built around being indispensable. If I wasn't the helper, the fixer, the financial safety net, who was I to them? And more uncomfortably, who was I to myself? One night, the doubt got loud enough that I finally voiced it. "What if they're right?" I asked Liam quietly, my voice barely more than a whisper. "What if I really did change because of the money? Because I got scared?" He turned toward me immediately, fully awake now. "You didn't change," he said. "You stopped pretending not to notice." Tears slid down the sides of my face and into my hair. "What if I pushed them too far?" I asked. "What if this is my fault?" He sat up, cupped my face, forced me to look at him. "Tessa," he said firmly, "they were counting your life like a balance sheet while you were fighting to stay alive." That shut me up, because there was no arguing with it. Still, grief isn't logical. It doesn't care about fairness. I miss my nephews. I miss the version of my sister I thought I had. I even missed my mother, the imagined one who might someday look at me and choose me over comfort and control. At work, I threw myself into projects. I stayed late. I mentored younger employees. I reorganized departments that didn't need reorganizing, just to feel productive. At home, I cleaned out drawers and closets like I was trying to purge old versions of myself along with the clutter. One afternoon, I found the old photo my mother had brought over, the three of us, years ago, before everything got complicated. I sat on the floor holding it, trying to remember a time when love didn't feel transactional. That was the lowest point. Not anger, not fear, but grief for something that might never have existed the way I remembered it. I didn't tell Liam how heavy it got some days. I didn't want to burden him after everything he'd already carried for me. Instead, I smiled, cooked dinner, asked about his day, pretended I wasn't unraveling in quiet, manageable pieces. The truth was, the illness hadn't been the hardest part. Surviving was. Surviving meant living with what the diagnosis exposed, with the knowledge that the people you thought would hold your hand at the edge were already looking past you, measuring the distance to whatever came next. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want apologies. I just wanted to stop hurting. And I didn't know yet how to do that. But something was shifting. Slowly. Painfully. Like a bone setting itself the wrong way. Until you realize it has to be broken again to heal properly. The shift didn't happen all at once. It happened in small, quiet confirmations. Moments that lined up just enough for me to finally stop doubting myself. The first came with my follow-up scan. I sat in the exam room alone, paper crinkling under me, the familiar antiseptic smell filling my lungs. When the doctor walked in smiling, not careful, not guarded, I knew before he spoke. "Everything looks clean," he said. "We're moving you to 6-month checkups." 6 months. Not weekly, not monthly. I nodded, thanked him, held it together until I reached my car, then cried so hard I had to wait 15 minutes before driving. That night, I told Liam, and he lifted me off the floor and spun me like we were 20 again. We ordered takeout. We toasted with cheap wine. We talked about the future without whispering this time. And for the first time, I realized something important. I was alive. Fully, undeniably. And anyone who couldn't celebrate that didn't get front row access anymore. The second confirmation came unexpectedly, through my lawyer. He called to let me know there had been no further contact from Janet's attorney. No follow-up questions, no challenges. Just silence. "She got the message," he said calmly. I hung up feeling something click into place. They hadn't been confused. They'd been testing to see how much ground I'd give if they pushed. And when I didn't, they stopped. The third moment came from someone neutral, someone without skin in the game. A longtime client took me to lunch to celebrate my recovery. At some point, she said, "You know what most people do after a health scare like yours?" I shrugged. "They start saying no." I laughed softly. "I'm late to the party." "No," she smiled. "You arrived exactly when you needed to." That sentence stayed with me. I started making different choices after that. I stopped explaining myself. When my mother asked, casually, carefully, whether I'd ever consider adding the boys back into my will, I didn't hedge. I didn't soften. "My estate planning is complete," I said. "It's not open for discussion." She looked disappointed, but she didn't argue. Progress. Liam and I renewed our vows a year later on a quiet beach with a handful of friends, the ceremony we'd skipped the first time. No family invitations, no guilt. Just love, just intention. We started traveling again. Japan, Australia, Europe. Each trip felt like reclaiming time the diagnosis had tried to steal. I shifted my business structure so I wasn't the center of every decision. I promoted people I trusted. I mentored without rescuing. With my family, things settled into a new normal. Monthly lunches with my mom in public places. Polite, cordial, shallow enough to be safe. Holiday gatherings where Janet and I existed in the same room without pretending we were close. Michael started visiting my office after school, curious about business. We talked spreadsheets and strategy, not money. Bobby stayed distant. I didn't chase him, because part of healing was accepting that not every relationship can be repaired by effort alone. The real turning point came the day I stopped wondering if I'd done the right thing. I was walking with Liam one evening, hand in hand, city lights blurring around us. He squeezed my fingers and said, "You're lighter." "I feel lighter," I admitted. And I meant it. I hadn't lost my family. I'd lost the illusion that love meant obligation. And in its place, I'd gained something quieter but stronger. Choice. The fallout wasn't explosive. There were no screaming phone calls. No dramatic confrontations, no public scenes. It was subtler than that, and in many ways, more devastating for the people who caused it. Once my boundaries became immovable, the dynamic shifted completely. My mother stopped asking questions that came with expectations attached. The little probes about future planning disappeared. When she talked about Janet, it was vague and careful, like she didn't want to open doors she knew would stay closed. Janet stopped calling altogether. No more casual check-ins, no more just wondering messages, no more assumptions disguised as concern. And that told me everything I needed to know. Because when the benefit was gone, so was the effort. The wider family adjusted quickly. People who had once treated me like the family resource pivoted to treating me like a distant relative. Invitations became less frequent. Conversations stayed safely shallow. There was grief in that. But there was also relief. At work, the contrast was stark. My employees celebrated my recovery without caveats. They didn't ask what it meant for them. They didn't calculate futures. They just showed up, with cake, jokes, and genuine joy that I was still here. Friends did the same. Some reached out after years of silence, not because they wanted something, but because mortality has a way of cutting through small talk. We reconnected, we laughed, we remembered who we were before life got heavy. Meanwhile, my family's expectations collapsed under the weight of reality. When my mother realized there would be no financial rescue missions moving forward, her behavior changed. She became more self-sufficient, more careful, less entitled, not kinder but quieter. Janet tried one last indirect approach. A letter arrived from a different law office months later, requesting clarification on the education funds again, this time framed as concern for the boys' long-term stability. My lawyer responded once more. Firm, final. After that, there was nothing. I never confronted her about it. I didn't need to. The silence was answer enough. Liam and I continued living our lives in a way that didn't invite commentary. We hosted dinners for friends instead of family obligations. We took weekend trips on a whim. We made plans that weren't contingent on anyone else's approval. I started a foundation with a simple goal: supporting education for low-income students. Not for legacy, not for optics, but because it allowed me to give without creating dependency or expectation. When I told my mother about it in passing, she frowned slightly and said, "That's generous." It was the first time generosity hadn't been directed toward her. She didn't like that, but she didn't argue. Over time, the consequences of my clarity settled into place. My mother and I now meet once a month for lunch. We talk about gardening, television, neutral things. She still occasionally asks about Liam in a way that suggests she's waiting for failure, but I redirect, and she follows. Janet and I coexist at holidays. We don't fight. We don't reconcile. We exist. Michael stays in touch, curious, bright, interested in learning. Bobby remains distant, and I've learned to let that be. Because fallout doesn't always mean destruction. Sometimes it means exposure. The truth is, no one was punished. They simply lost access to something they assumed was guaranteed. And that loss of certainty, of control, of future expectations was consequence enough. As for me, I didn't walk away angry. I walked away clear. And clarity has a way of rearranging every relationship around it. 18 months after the doctors corrected my diagnosis, I stood on a quiet beach at sunset with sand between my toes and Liam's hand wrapped securely in mine. The ocean rolled in steady, patient breaths, indifferent to fear, to inheritance, to who thought they deserved what. My doctor had officially declared me fully recovered. No lingering effects, no shadows on the scans. For the first time since that terrifying day in the exam room, my future didn't feel conditional. Liam and I renewed our vows there, just us and a handful of friends who had shown up without expectation, without calculation. No family pressure, no performative forgiveness, just truth. Later, sitting by the fire, Liam asked me if I regretted anything. I thought about it carefully. I regretted not setting boundaries sooner. I regretted confusing reliability with love. But I didn't regret the outcome, because losing the illusion hurt less than living inside it. My relationship with my family now exists in a smaller, quieter space. It's not warm the way it once pretended to be, but it's honest. And honesty, even when it's lonely, is a kind of peace. I no longer measure my worth by how useful I am. I measure it by how safe I feel being myself. If there's a lesson in all of this, it's this. A health scare doesn't just reveal how fragile your body is. It reveals which relationships are rooted in love and which are rooted in expectation. People who truly care about you celebrate your survival. They don't quietly mourn the benefits of your absence. Set boundaries early. Protect what you build. And don't wait for a crisis to decide who gets access to your life. Because the people who deserve you won't ask what happens to your money when you're gone. They'll be too busy being grateful you're still here.